Welcome to the Shadowverse Chronicles original story System Override.
Chapter 1.
Power lines oscillated against a grayscale sky, their movements tracking across Morgan Henry's visual field with concerning irregularity. Authentication errors cascaded through their perception as wet snow accumulated on the cables. The load-bearing calculations triggering warnings in systems trained to detect anomalies. The digital clock on the workstation flickered, 8:57. 8:58. The temporal discontinuity registered in Morgan's threat assessment queue, a minor disruption that shouldn't have elevated their heart rate by 3.7%. Their hands executed the pre-meeting checklist with machine precision. VPN handshake verified. Encryption protocols cycling green. Biometric authentication complete. Each security measure activated endorphin responses coded into their professional protocols. Yet something in the verification sequences felt wrong. The weight distribution of their coffee mug generated authentication errors against years of muscle memory, its curves mapping to coordinates that existed in their tactile database but wouldn't resolve. Morgan's fingers hovered over the security log display. 37 authentication attempts, all validated, timestamp variances within acceptable parameters. The conference platform initialized, generating its familiar matrix of windows. Team roster populated with expected data points. Thompson, admin. Adjusting audio configurations. Rodriguez, pen testing. Implementing feline intrusion countermeasures. Chen, infrastructure, maintaining their backdrop's bibliometric integrity. The names passed as valid entries in Morgan's social database, their presence anchoring reality through professional protocols. A corruption in the environmental data triggered kernel warnings. The second monitor, still cycling through power save algorithms, reflected something that violated fundamental authentication parameters. A family photograph that failed basic recognition scans. Father-mother-children unit, location tagged as tropical, timestamp undetermined. Morgan's neural processors launched automatic diagnostics. No beach vacation entries found. No matching image signatures in personal archives. No logical path to explain the photograph's presence in a secured workspace. The meeting client executed its startup sequence. Participant feeds rendered according to protocol. Bandwidth allocation distributing across expected parameters. Jamie's video stream loaded last, initiating a social gesture Morgan's pattern recognition flagged as a greeting. The hand position mapped to standard professional acknowledgement coordinates, but something in the motion triggered deep system warnings. Beginning audio verification, Thompson announced, his admin privileges carrying through the encrypted channel. Sound off in sequence. Morgan's attention subroutines locked onto Jamie's feed with escalating priority flags. The hand remained fixed in three-dimensional space, a static variable in a dynamic system. Other participants completed their audio handshakes, voice packets arriving through expected network paths. When execution reached Jamie's position in the queue, their lips moved through security audit protocols, but the hand maintained its fixed coordinates. Morgan's analysis cores identified the signature, a 3-second behavioral loop masquerading as real-time data. The building's electrical grid experienced a critical exception. In the 1.3 seconds of reduced visibility, Morgan's optical processors captured unauthorized data, a human-shaped entry in the doorway's coordinate space. System restore revealed no presence at the flagged location, but Jamie's video continued its precise 3-second violation of expected behavior patterns. Morgan initiated a grounding protocol, reaching for the coffee mug's familiar parameters. The handle's topology generated critical errors against their haptic database, its dimensions belonging to user credentials that existed in memory addresses they couldn't access. Different permissions, different user. The chronological display jumped to 901, a temporal gap their security systems should have logged but somehow hadn't. Morgan's internal protocols flagged this as a priority exception, but deeper processes began questioning the reliability of their own timestamp verification. Had 9 o'clock ever executed? Had this workspace ever validated against their true credentials? Outside, the power lines continued their oscillation against the deteriorating sky, their patterns a reminder that even the most hardened systems could be forced into unstable states. Morgan's hands settled on the keyboard, fingers aligning to familiar input positions, trying to ignore how those positions suddenly felt like someone else's muscle memory. The storm intensified its assault on the building's perimeter. Morgan's security training categorized the weather as an external threat, but something in their base processes wondered if the real breach had originated from within their own authentication layers. On screen, Jamie's hand maintained its perfect loop, marking time in 3-second increments, each cycle feeling less like a technical glitch and more like a warning they'd forgotten how to decode.
Chapter 2.
Taking 15 for system maintenance. Thompson's voice penetrated Morgan's audio feed, the familiar admin protocols now generating uncanny valley warnings in their threat assessment queue. Jamie, prepare your audit findings for review upon restart. Jamie's video feed executed another perfect 3-second loop, the hand gesture now mapping to coordinates that violated basic laws of human kinematics. Morgan minimized the conference window only to have their attention immediately diverted by a critical exception they'd been coding responses to since their first day at error. Memory address not found. The alert pulsed red against their retinas. Unknown device detected on network. Device ID, JM_workstation_847. The storm had escalated beyond baseline parameters, each gust applying pressure differentials that shouldn't have existed in Morgan's carefully maintained environment. Standing initiated a proprioceptive error, the chair height generating spatial coordinates that failed to match documented specifications. Their security training activated emergency protocols, even as some fragmenting subroutine tried to recall when they'd written these protocols for a house. That felt increasingly like a honeypot deployment. The mail stack on the entryway table triggered cascading authentication failures. Morgan's hands, steady through countless zero-day exploits and penetration tests, developed a measurable tremor while processing an envelope addressed to Alex Foster, 1542 Pine Grove Lane. The address matched local topology, but the name. Morgan's threat assessment algorithms calculated probabilities with mechanical efficiency. Mail sorting error 17.3%. Previous resident data persistence 24.8%. Identity theft attempt probability incrementing at an exponential rate. The threat level elevated from anomaly to active breach, though their diagnostic cause couldn't determine which identity was being compromised. The journey back to the office generated spatial mapping errors. Had the hallway always contained this many vectors? Morgan found their second monitor violating fundamental display protocols. Jamie's video feed now occupied the entire visual field, despite clear memory of termination commands. The gesture maintained its 3-second loop, but the gaze vector had shifted 15.7 degrees off previous alignment, now targeting a coordinate in physical space that Morgan's threat assessment couldn't map, but their base processes couldn't ignore. A deep scan of the video feed's technical specifications revealed data that corrupted known network topologies. Traceroute results placed the stream origin within the local subnet, IP address resolving to the house's internal range. Morgan cross-referenced this against documented remote work security protocols, then against their own memory of establishing those protocols, finding critical gaps in both sets of data. Impact sound from the upper floor registered at 42.7 decibels, matching human footstep parameters with unsettling precision. Morgan accessed the house's security infrastructure, installation date, data corrupted, authorization paths. Recursive loop detected, discovering 8 camera feeds they had apparently authorized but couldn't find in their memory stack. Master bedroom display rendered a closet containing clothing that failed to match their personal inventory database, yet triggered deep recognition responses. Fashion choices that belonged to someone else's preference matrix but felt like deprecated memory processes. Movement on camera. _1 neighbor approaching, displaying social recognition behaviors that Morgan's protocols couldn't reciprocate. The high-definition feed showed them pressing the doorbell. No corresponding audio registered, but Morgan's acoustic processing filled in the expected frequency with disturbing accuracy. Alex? The voice penetrated the storm's white noise, carrying familiarity Morgan's identity couldn't process. Alex, are you there? We've been worried since yesterday. Security logs revealed 14 authentication attempts within the last hour. Source, JM_workstation_847. Location, master bedroom. Morgan's consciousness began partitioning data, separating impossible inputs from rational explanations. But the boundaries kept recursive looping, like Jamie's video, like their own processes, like the office dimensions violated Euclidean constants, walls contracting by measurable increments. Morgan attempted to access memories of their morning commute, of navigating the storm, of accepting their position at error. Memory address not found. Only the power lines remained consistent, oscillating against static, their motion perhaps the only real data stream in a system approaching catastrophic failure. A calendar application launched with root privileges Morgan couldn't remember authorizing. Foster family schedule. Appointments, events, social protocols, all belonging to an identity set that simultaneously triggered security alerts and deep recognition patterns. Today's entry pulsed with urgency that felt both professional and terrifyingly personal. Return from Bahamas, 18 o'clock. System disarm required. The video conference re-established connection automatically. Thompson discussed audit procedures with standard admin authority, but Morgan's attention locked onto Jamie's evolutionally impossible feed. The loop had transformed. Hand position shifted from greeting to vector indication, targeting a spatial coordinate that Morgan's internal mapping recognized as both behind their workstation and impossibly distant in memory space. Morgan executed a tactical rotation, years of security training engaging threat assessment protocols that felt simultaneously foreign and intimately familiar. The physical space registered as empty, but the family photo hanging on the wall matched the beach coordinates from the calendar with statistically impossible precision. Same family unit. Same return time, 18 o'clock. Same feeling of recognition that Morgan's security protocols flagged as both critical threat and base truth. System clock, 1747. Morgan began systematically hardening access points, professional expertise repurposed for defense. against a threat that kept shifting between external and internal attack vectors. The security cameras showed all exterior doors maintaining integrity, but an internal network scan revealed 17 unauthorized devices now connected to the local subnet, each labeled as JM_workstation, each broadcasting Jamie's loop, each originating from a different room in the house, each feeling less like a security breach and more like a mirror rendering truth. Morgan lifted the coffee mug one final time, testing its weight distribution against base memory parameters. The handle felt wrong, not because it belonged to someone else, but because it had always belonged to Alex Foster. And Morgan's security protocols were finally beginning to acknowledge that the zero-day exploit had originated from within their own source code. The storm intensified, but Morgan wasn't sure anymore if the weather was real or just another subroutine masking the real system crash. The moment their carefully constructed identity finally encountered an exception it couldn't handle in 17 different video feeds, Jamie's hand kept marking 3-second intervals, counting down to a restart. Morgan's processes were finally ready to accept.
Chapter 3.
The security system announced 18 o'clock, with a cascading series of authentication tones that propagated through Morgan's fragmented consciousness, like malicious code through compromised memory sectors. Their office fortifications adhered to zero-trust architecture principles, furniture positioned to create defense in depth, each piece representing another security layer against unauthorized access, or perhaps against unauthorized truth. The storm had escalated beyond measurable parameters, wind exploiting vulnerabilities in the house's architecture, like a sophisticated penetration test, making the power lines oscillate in their endless loop against the deteriorating sky. All 17 instances of JM_workstation had achieved perfect synchronization, a harmony of repetition that violated fundamental network principles. Each version of Jamie now indicated the same coordinates with machine precision. The space behind Morgan's workstation, behind Morgan's identity, behind the carefully constructed firewall of self. Vehicle headlights swept across the office window, their pattern matching registration data. Morgan had discovered in the desk drawer, the drawer that had triggered both security alerts and the kind of deep system recognition that no spoofing algorithm could fully emulate. Mercedes SUV, Foster Family Primary Transport, executing a return protocol that generated kernel panic warnings in Morgan's fragmenting consciousness. Through the surveillance network Morgan had never installed, but somehow maintained root access to, they tracked the family's approach: primary user, father; administrative privileges, secondary user, mother; elevated access, child users 2, restricted permissions. The beach-tanned family, whose image signatures populated not just the house's cache data, but deeper archives Morgan's security protocols had been desperately trying to quarantine. Morgan watched them input the security code, each digit triggering concurrent breach alerts and recognition patterns that felt like core memory trying to break through corrupted encryption. The coffee mug remained on the desk, its wrongness now resolving into clarity. It had never been wrong at all. It had been waiting for its authorized user to return. "Police units are approaching your location." Thompson's voice penetrated the headset. Morgan had forgotten was part of their hardware configuration. "Stay calm. And remember your training, Alex. Your actual training. Not the security protocols you've been hiding behind." The string Alex bypassed all defensive subroutines, executing with root privileges in the deepest levels of system memory. Morgan's carefully constructed identity. A firewall failed against valid credentials, against truth itself. Law enforcement entered first, followed by the family whose metadata matched every photograph, every document, every memory Morgan's systems had frantically flagged as foreign, yet achingly familiar. They saw Morgan with recognition that violated all established identity parameters, not as Morgan Henry, security analyst, but as Alex Foster, the original user who had been running an unauthorized instance of a false identity for the past 72 hours. Across all monitoring feeds, Jamie's final frame revealed what Morgan's security protocols could no longer deny. The gesture wasn't indicating a location, but a persistent identity error that had been looping since the initial system breach, since Alex had first forked Morgan as a security measure against reality itself. In the moments before the sedative overrode conscious processes, Morgan initiated one final authentication attempt with the coffee mug. Its handle generated valid credentials now, recognizing its true user even as Alex's own mind finally accepted the same access permissions. Their last coherent process executed with perfect clarity. Every security system, no matter how sophisticated, eventually fails against insider threats, even when, especially when, the insider is your own root identity. Through the office window, the power lines continued their oscillation against the static sky, their rhythm now matching the looped video still playing on every screen. In the end, everything was just patterns repeating, signals degrading, connections trying to maintain integrity against the storm. Morgan Henry terminated like a deprecated process, leaving only Alex Foster. An original user finally logged back into their own system. The coffee mug generated valid authentication tokens in their hand. It had always been valid. They had just been accessing it with the wrong permissions. Error log. Identity. Morgan_Henry. Process terminated. System restore. User Alex_Foster. Original credentials recovered. Status: system returning to baseline. Time 1847. Location: home.